Good evening and a very warm welcome to this week's Out and About. Over the past couple of weeks, you would have seen that we've been joined on the programme by financial advisor Bhupinder Anand, and I'm pleased to say that he joins us once again this week to give us all the inside information all about trusts. Bhupinder, great to have you on the show again this week. In today's programme, we're going to be talking about trusts. Again, like our previous subjects, it's something that we've heard a lot of, but perhaps don't really know the ins and outs of what a trust is. So just to get into it, explain to our viewers exactly what a trust really is.
Great. So trusts sound like they're going to be really complicated, really sophisticated. They sound like they're only for really wealthy people. They're not.
Right.
Okay, they're not. They've got some core principles, and once you understand those, then you can talk to somebody who really understands the mechanisms behind them as to what you can do with them. So let's just talk in principle about what they are. They're not new, they're not aggressive. These have been going for hundreds of years. You know, when Richard the Lionheart went off on his crusades, he's a wealthy man, and he didn't know if he's going to come back, so he left all his assets in trusts for his children. So trusts have been going on for hundreds of years, and the wealthy aristocracy, the landed gentry, I'm sure that's an Indian word, gentry.
I'm sure it is. It sounds like it should
sounds
be
like
anyway.
It should be. Have been, all these stately homes and all of these things have been held in trusts. Mm-hmm. And the reasons for trusts are not just tax. So I really want to hammer this home. People think they're tax avoidance devices. Now, they help with tax.
Right.
But the starting point for me with trusts is protecting your assets.
Okay.
Protecting your assets for your generations, plural, to come. Okay? In the sense that when human beings own assets, if things go wrong in our life, those assets are at risk. Such as, if we die without having our affairs in order, the taxman might take a share of it, or other members of the family or non-family will try and attack it. If we get divorced, half of our wealth could disappear if it's in our name. If we have creditor problems, our wealth could be attacked, and ultimately, and we talked about this in a previous episode, the taxman wants 40%.
Yes.
And of course, if you need to go into care in some way, local authority may want to attack some of that wealth. So what a trust does is act as a protective device around your assets, around your wealth. The problem is, how do you get an asset into trust and how will it work? And the problem for most people is it's got to start at a generation.
Right.
And once that first generation has bit the bullet and done it, it's there for generations to come. A trust has three aspects to it. A settlor, I don't want to get too deep in jargon, but a settlor is the person who puts the asset, usually cash, could be property, into a trust. A trust could be a bank account. I like to think of it and visualize it as a shoebox.
Right, a bit of a safe almost.
Yeah, it's a secure box, and I'm putting my assets in there. I'm the settlor. Once I've put those in, I appoint a trustee, normally myself, normally family members, to manage those assets. The key point, they're no longer mine. Just move from my name into this box, and somebody else is now managing it. They're managing it for the third entity, the beneficiaries. So the beneficiaries are discretionary, meaning there are a list of people that I as a settlor have appointed, but the trustees can decide who should benefit.
Right.
So I would make sure that it's what I call my bloodline that are the beneficiaries. So my spouse, my children, their children, and then what we call remoter issue. And so anything that's gone into that box, which might be during my lifetime, with the 7-year clock for inheritance tax we talked about, so I've started that by moving it into a trust, or on death, we talked about this in our first session, that a good will should send assets to a trust.
Right.
Once it's in there, somebody's going to manage it. And so it's then protected. Because for my bloodline, if things go wrong in their life, those assets in there should be protected. I think an example would be a good thing to do here is the Duke of Westminster. So some people may have heard of him. One of the wealthiest people on the planet because he owns Mayfair.
I was about to say, yes.
Properties in Mayfair, a billionaire.
Yeah.
He died in 2016. Do you know what his inheritance tax bill was? Bearing in mind 40% inheritance tax?
Go on.
A big fat zero.
How?
Because it then came out publicly that he doesn't own Mayfair. It's the Grosvenor Estate Trust
Right.
that owns all the properties in Mayfair.
Okay.
He was just the current beneficiary of this thing that had been going down generations. One of the things that you can then do is if somebody says, okay, well, I've got this money in a trust. That's no good to me in a trust. I want it in my pocket. Some clever things that you could then do. If it's cash, you can take an interest-free loan. Not me as a settlor, because I put it in.
Yes.
But one of the beneficiaries could take an interest-free loan,
They can.
no monthly payments,
Right.
from that trust. They have cash, go and spend it.
Okay.
Go and buy handbags, whatever it is that you want to buy. But upon that borrower's demise, that money must be paid back to the trust.
Right.
Okay, because it's a loan from the trust. It's not a loan from a bank, it's a loan from the trust.
Because a loan from a bank would, of course, come with interest.
Exactly. So this is interest-free, but where's it going back to is the next line of the family,
Right.
who can then also borrow it. And from a tax perspective, inheritance tax perspective, I've reduced my estate because I had to pay something back. So I saved 40% as well. So when the Duke of Westminster died, it then became public that he had a 0% tax bill because all the money that had been borrowed for buying his Ferraris and Rolls Royces and living his life all had to go back. So he had nothing left to tax.
Right.
So it's worth talking about some of the negatives of a trust, okay?
Well, like everything, there are pros and there are cons.
Absolutely.
So this all sounds very nice, but I'm sure there are some cons that we need to talk about.
So it would be remiss of me not to say what some of the negatives are.
Absolutely.
And then it's a case of somebody understanding that and saying, does the negative outweigh the positive? Or the other way? So what came out was, the press was saying, how does a billionaire avoid inheritance tax?
Of course.
When us mere mortals have to pay 40%. And the trust then came out to say, well, because we own all of these assets, and because a trust owns assets, there's a different tax.
Right.
I don't want to get too complicated, but roughly 6% on the assets of a trust every 10 years.
Wow. So very different then.
Very different. Now, I would argue 6% every 10 years is a lot better than 40% every time somebody dies.
Yes.
Okay. So it's not that it's completely avoiding taxes, it's changing the shape of those taxes.
Yeah. So we've got the protection there as an advantage. What are some of the other advantages that a trust can offer?
That's a good question. So protection is really important. It's a driving factor. Avoidance of inheritance tax on a human being, again, is an advantage. But what if you've got an asset inside the trust, like a property, and it's kicking out rent?
Yes.
Here's something that people don't really know what you can do. And if you're an accountant, they would say, oh, trusts are no good because the trust pays high rates of tax. But that's if it keeps the rent.
Right.
If the trust gives the rent to a beneficiary, and remember, it's a discretionary trust, which means the trustees can exercise discretion from that list of beneficiaries who should have it. And if you've got a minor child, that from the moment a child is born, they have a
personal allowance.
You were listening. Fantastic. So for those that didn't see that episode, from the moment a child is born, they have a £12,500 personal allowance. But most people don't know how to give them that income so that they can get it tax-free.
Right.
A trust can give it to them.
So that gives them the power, essentially, to hand that over to them.
Correct.
Right.
Whereas a parent can't do that for a child, but a trust can. So that way, you're benefiting because now you're getting tax-free income to use on the children instead of using your own taxed money to pay for the children. This is how wealthy people stay wealthy.
Very wealthy, yeah. Now, I know that we've joked about it, that you don't normally hear about a lot of these things, but quite often that's because people often have their heads buried in the sand or they don't want to really learn about it because they might not know where to start. Trusts are a really, really important thing that people should be considering. So, in summary, what are some of the key benefits of having a trust and why should people really have one?
Well, let me tell you straight why you need to have one. First of all, we went through some detail. Forgive me for that. There is a lot of jargon. What does that really mean? Take some advice. Don't Google this. Don't try and do this yourself because whatever you do, you will get wrong. You need to talk to somebody that understands what trusts are, how they work, and can tell you all the pros and the cons, because there are negatives and you need to know that. Reality, most solicitors can't help you because they can tell you the legal side, but they can't tell you about the tax. Most accountants can't help you because they can tell you about some tax, not everything, and not the legal side, and most financial advisors don't get involved in this level of tax planning. You need somebody that can draw it all together, bring law, tax and financial planning under one roof, and you will be amazed at the kind of things that you could achieve that you never even dreamt of. Take good advice.
Huge thanks once again to Bhupinder, and of course for all the advice that he brings us. Time to take a very short break, but there's more still to come in part 2, so make sure you join us again in a few moments' time.